investigation, our department is committed to doing a thorough, transparent, and extensive investigation alongside our state's attorney's office. And at this time, I will turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Nato to go over the body camera video for you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We're going to release the body-worn camera, which involved the police-involved shooting from last Thursday. Following our body-worn camera release policy, this video has been shared with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the State's Attorney's Office, and the Baltimore Office of Equity and Civil Rights. To put some context into what you're about to see, last Thursday, 2 of our district action team officers were in the area of 2547 McHenry Street. They observed 2 individuals, and the officers exited their vehicle to speak with them. As you may see on social media, one of the officers, Officer Cedric Ellaby, took a seat on a stoop with one of the individuals who later was identified as the 17-year-old involved in the incident. Shortly after, the 17-year-old and his friend began to leave the area. The officers believed the later ID'd 17-year-old had a bulge near his waistband and decided to approach him. At that time, the individual fled on foot. The video you will watch is from Officer Cedric Ellaby, who joined the department in June of 2019. We will be providing you the raw footage, but for this setting, we'll show you the video twice. Once, so we can point out items of interest, and the second time from the officer's view. For informational purposes, Officer Ellaby has been assigned to administrative duties at this time, which is our protocol, and as we refer to Health and Wellness Program. As you may recall from before, once we start the video, there's a 1-minute buffer at the beginning, so you'll only see the video for 1 minute before the audio begins. At this time, we'll start the video. This is the officer sitting on the stoop. Sitting next to him was the 17-year-old who just got up along with his friend and are now starting to walk away. Here, you'll notice the individual is pulling the gun from his waistband.
Stop! Put the gun down! Put the gun down!
Here you see in the circle is the individual carrying the firearm now. Moments later, he's turning back to the right to look back at the officer. And that is the weapon that fell from the individual's hand. Shots fired. And this will be the unedited version. Notice in the area, there's no one else around at this time except for the one gentleman sitting on the stoop up the road. The rest of the area is clear.
Shots fired, shots fired, shots fired.
You'll see people starting to come to the area, whether officers are administering first aid, waiting for the medics. While his partner is rendering first aid, the officer who was involved in the shooting actually is controlling the scene.
Stay right there. Drop a 13, drop a 13. Back up! Back up! Back up! Back up! Back up! I don't give a fuck about none of that, bro! Back up! Back up! Back up! Back up! Back up! Back up! Back up!
And the officer takes the weapon off the ground for safety and security. That's a photograph of the firearm. It's a Smith & Wesson 9mm. It's an extended magazine with 4 rounds in it. And that was marijuana that was taken from the individual's knapsack.
All right. So Detective Elby remains on routine administrative leave and has been referred to the Officer Safety and Wellness Unit. While this is certainly always an unfortunate event, this investigation is still ongoing. What we do know is that in the last 28 days, there have been more than 150 calls for service in this area, to include calls for disorderly persons, burglary, assault, calls for narcotics, and 3 calls for an armed person. This area is located in our tri-district area and is a microzone. This area is a focused area to provide greater visibility and better response times with the goal of deterring and preventing violent crime in this historically violent area. Additionally, just this month, BP joined the state's attorney's office in announcing a takedown in this very same neighborhood, Shipley Hill. While we have been working with our partners in this area and recently completed a community walk with residents to address concerns of illegal dumping, boarded up vacant houses, and removing illegal vehicles from the streets, I will once again say and express my commitment to a thorough, fair, and impartial investigation. And at this time, we'll take a few questions. Lindsay?
We're going to start with Brittany and then work our way to the end.
Okay, I just have 2. We saw the video, but can you describe characteristics of a person with a gun? What exactly that looks like? A lot of people don't really know, but that was mentioned in the initial press conference.
There are a number of things that are taught in training to officers to observe particular bulges. The way the person stands or swings their arms, or the shift in body stance. It is the way they adjust their arms to either keep the firearm from falling through their waistline or to support it and keep it up. Then there's sometimes fidgeting. We'll see a person fidgeting with something that's not in a pocket. And so all of that together, and maybe there's information that we have about an armed person or armed persons. But when you put all that together, that's what heightens the suspicion that a person could possibly be armed and gives us the legal right in the Fourth Amendment to stop and investigate.
Okay, and last question. Some people in that area thought that the young boy was shot multiple times. Can you guys confirm if he received one gunshot?
I think the officer fired 4 times. To my knowledge, that this young man was shot only once. We don't have the medical examiner's report to confirm exactly where the entry wound was. You saw the officer rendering first aid, but he was only shot 1 time, to my knowledge.
So can you say what offense the teen was suspected of when the officer decided to pursue him on foot?
Well, this is under investigation. The officer has not yet been interviewed. And so what we can say that we know now is that the officer apparently believed that this individual was armed. And at some point, the subject fled and the officer saw fit to give pursuit. And at that point, the officer observed him pull the gun out just as you just did, and the officer discharged his weapon.
And can you say whether this engagement with the teens, like the group that started this, was part of the district action team's work with GVRS, or if it was related to like district priorities separate from GVRS?
What we believe right now is that this was not GVRS or GVU related, that they were out there engaging, and they were, think about this, the officer took a seat on the step next to this person and was actually engaging, and until the behavior escalated, it caused the officer to heighten his attention and focus was heightened, and then you saw the pursuit. But the officer was actually engaging and not enforcing until he had to enforce.
Can you talk about whether this falls under BPD's use of force policy in terms of like whether it's necessary to stop an immediate threat when someone is fleeing?
Well, I should not, we have the policy, you should see the policy. I should not comment on whether or not the officer is following or is not following policy. That's what the investigation should produce, a finding to determine that. It would be not just irregular, but unethical for me to render an opinion before the investigation produces its finding.
Okay. And were the body cams turned on earlier than when the video started, or did the officer turn it on when he started interacting with the teens for a reason?
It appears that he turned it on before the interaction started, and what we saw was the beginning of it, where it started, where he was actually on the steps sitting next to him.
Okay.
We don't know how long it had been on before that.
So the officer turned on the body-worn camera as he approached the individual when he noticed the bulge, turned it on. That's the interaction for which they were required to turn it on. The reason it picked up a minute before, because it's always recording, of course, and you get the video from before. The 1 minute before is why you see him on the stoop. But the entire interaction, when the audio starts, is when the body-worn camera was actually turned on.
And that's when he noticed the bulge, you said, and then
They noticed the bulge before that. They were talking with him to see what kind of interaction they're going to have. Once they decided to approach him, is when they were required to turn on the body-worn camera. That's when they turned it on.
Can you talk, so you said that, just to clarify, you said that he noticed the bulge beforehand. When exactly did he notice the bulge, and was it when he was sitting down, and why didn't he take action before?
Well, once again, we haven't interviewed the officer for the officer to tell us that. What we know is what we see in the video, and what we know from our experience, that he was engaging, but at some point decided to continue to engage and stood up from the steps when the subject walked away. He approached, continued to engage until the person took flight, and then the officer began to chase.
And we heard that, we talked to some witnesses who said that that officer had been harassing them in the weeks prior. I was wondering if you could comment on that and what you could say about that.
I'm not aware of any complaints that have been filed against the officer from any behavior weeks prior. What we can say is that you clearly saw the officer engaging like we want the officers to engage. And the officer had the spatial awareness and, in my opinion, the professionalism to sit there and engage until his actions were escalated.
Barry in the back.
And I think this is possibly similar to the other question. Have there been any prior activities involving that officer and the 17-year-old or other officers prior to that where the officer, where the teenager and his family talked about harassment and stuff like that? Was there, you don't believe that there was anything?
To our knowledge, there's not been any complaints that this officer had any interactions with this individual or other individuals from that location prior to this date.
Anything else, Barry? Wanna go to Keith?
Mr. Commissioner, those concerned about illegal handguns on the streets say another illegal gun removed from the streets, great job. But what do you say to those who are concerned about the initial engagement? I know you've touched on it previously, but what do you say about those who are concerned about the initial engagement? And the follow-up, can you speak to the specialized training that we were told that prompted that engagement?
Well, I can say that what I will say to people is you saw and they will now see that this officer was out of the car, which citizens are asking for officers to do, engaging and disarming, if you will, because the officer took a seat right next to this individual and was engaging until the officer's actions escalated because the individual took flight. What you've seen is we took 2,400 guns, 2,600 guns plus off the streets last year with more than 1,600 arrests. Not one of them resulted in a police-involved shooting. Not one. And so the officers have been trained in use of force. The best policy in American policing is here in Baltimore. Stops, searches, and arrests. The best policy in America is in this department. EPIC, ethical policing is courageous. Bias-free policing. And we have undergone a lot of training to make sure we're only using the force that's absolutely necessary and absolutely lawful.
Mr. Commissioner, are you satisfied with the findings? If so, with what you saw? If so, why?
Well, there are no findings yet. The investigation is not complete.
Are you satisfied with what you saw?
Well, every police-involved shooting is an unfortunate incident. Every shooting and the harm to anyone is unfortunate. And so I will not say anything about whether I am satisfied because it will be totally unethical for me to pass judgment before the end of it. And I would be not only undermining but corrupting the investigation if I answered that like that today. So please. Thank you.
Commissioner, what can you say about the teen's weapon? Have you been able to determine where it came from?
We know that it was stolen in 2021, and we do not have the information. I don't have that with me at the moment, but we do know and can confirm that it was a stolen weapon.
Can you say, from looking at the video, was the officer threatened in any way? Was it just the fact that the teen had a weapon? And I know you said you didn't have the medical examiner's report. Was the teen shot through the back? Can you even say that?
It's unknown. What we saw is what we saw, one officer rendering aid, and that's what we saw. So it's unknown or undetermined right now which one of those injuries is the entry wound and which one is the exit wound. All we know is what we saw from the video. The officer has not been interviewed. What I can say is what we're reporting on is what my deputy commissioner and the mayor and the state's attorney's office saw the night this happened and what we're showing you right now. And so the officer's frame of mind, what the officer was thinking, won't be known until we're able to interview the officer.
All right, young lady in the back?
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't listening.
Okay, no worries. Any other follow-up questions?
Is the teen charged with anything, and will he be charged with anything?
We have gone to a court commissioner. The affidavit has been turned over to the state's attorney's office. The state's attorney is the final decider of what charges will happen, and so we will be in constant consultation about what charges, if any, he will be charged with.
Can you say what charges were presented to the court commissioner?
They are the final decider, and so we will be in consultation. I cannot, should not, we will wait for our consultation with the state's attorneys.
You mentioned, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You talked about the stolen weapon. Do you know where it was, you mentioned the year when it was stolen, but do you know where it was stolen from? Was it stolen here in Baltimore City, from someplace in the city, or anything like that?
It was stolen out of an automobile in the Western District in June, if it was June of 2019.
19, I said 21.
Excuse me, 2021.
All right.
2021.
21?
All right.
Keith had a follow-up question?
Yes, sir. Mr. Commissioner, you mentioned that the officer has not been interviewed yet. Why not?
Well, there's a protocol with state law and policy, and that there's a time frame when we will interview the officer. It just hasn't happened as of yet, but there is a strict protocol that's supported by state law that tells us when we can and when we should do that.
Brittany, right here?
Is it standard for officers to shoot when someone's running?
The decision to use deadly force is always based on the need, reasonable, proportionate, and necessary. And the officer has to determine that in a second, in a nanosecond. But it is based on the threat and the potential of threat that the officer has to assess to be able to make that decision.
Anything else?
Is there any other body camera footage of the interaction while they're like sitting on the stoop or,
No.
Mr. Commissioner, you mentioned that the officer initially engaged with the, I guess I'll call him suspect. He was sitting down on the stoop with that suspect. The officer drove up, saw him, and he just got out and they just started talking, or how did that initial engagement
Well,
get off?
it appears from what we know is that two officers got out and began to engage, and at some point took a seat on the steps next to this individual. And the body camera begins, and what you see is the individual gets up, the officer gets up to follow and to walk, and they re-engage, and the officer's talking. The camera is buffering, so you have the 60-second buffer where you don't hear the audio. And then the audio kicks in, and then at that point you see the individual take flight.
All right, thank
All
you
right?
guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.